workforce reallocation from at-risk roles to essential employees. With more than 2 decades in the HR technology space, he's a Forbes Technology Council member and an excellent leader before and over the years I've worked with him. But he's been an especially bright light during this crisis. He's been providing hope, guidance, and support for all of us here at Trend Data. And he's also been producing this thought leader content for HR and business leaders. And we are very lucky to have him. And with that, I give you co-founder and CEO of Trend Data, Tom McEwen.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Very great. Thank you for that introduction. Well, welcome everybody. Glad so many of you are able to make it here today. Probably a lot of you working from home like me and looking for something to do, but I'm glad you were able to join our webinar. So the title of the webinar is Workforce Reallocation from At-Risk Roles to Essential Employees. And you might wonder what the pictures up here have to do with. Well, I'm a bit of a sports nut, and what I put up here was actually 3 instances in sports where 2 great players played the same position. Over to the left, you've got Alex Rodriguez, who when he was transferred was a shortstop when he was traded to the New York Yankees, who of course already had Hall of Famer Derek Jeter at shortstop. So Alex Rodriguez got moved to third base, and they proved to be a pretty good team. Same thing for the middle group. You might not recognize them because they're not the ones who played in the movie, but this is Gale Sayers and Brian Piccolo, the original, the real ones. They were both drafted as halfbacks, but both were so stellar that the Bears moved Piccolo to fullback so that they could start on the same backfield. And then, of course, over to the right, if you're a Texan, you remember these 2 great centers from the San Antonio Spurs playing at the same time, but of course only one of them could play center and the other was moved to forward. But in all 3 instances, produced championships and great teams. So, as I said, Jonathan introduced me. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Trend Data, Tom McEwen. And just a little background on Trend Data. We are headquartered in Richardson, Texas. Our company's been around about 3 years now. We market largely to corporate clients or organizations with workforces. And our offering is predictive people analytics. It's a cloud SaaS offering. Now, this isn't a product pitch. This is one of a series of topical webinars. We're going to try and do one every week on Thursday at the same time. So hopefully, if you like this first one, you'll dial back in to some of the other ones. But what we're going to cover today, kind of in line with the topic of moving at-risk employees to essential jobs, we'll talk a little bit about the impact of layoffs and why they might be something companies might want to avoid even in down economic times. And then we'll go through some definitions of what exactly is an essential job, both from what the government determines as an essential job and what you as a company or an organization determine as an essential job to you. And then we'll look at some assessment scenarios of how you can determine ahead of time what are at-risk jobs. And then we'll look at methodologies of how you might reallocate some of these at-risk people in at-risk jobs into essential jobs. And then we'll discuss some of the tools available to provide you the insights and action to be able to do these things to the benefit of your organization. As Jonathan mentioned, we will leave some time open for questions at the end, so just submit them through the chat facility and we'll try to get to all of them. I'm going to try and keep this within a half an hour for the content, but if the questions go on longer, we can of course make this a little longer, but I want to be respectful of you, the attendees' time. So, let's look at the downside of layoffs. Of course, there's a downside of layoffs to the employee who gets laid off. But what are the downsides to the employer when they end up doing layoffs? Well, a number of studies from SHRM and some of the big consulting firms like Deloitte and such have identified a number of things that the employer is probably going to have to endure if they go through a large layoff. The first, which is kind of a little counterintuitive, but most companies that do layoffs end up increasing their voluntary turnover. So if you do a large layoff of employees, and there are people who didn't get laid off and stay with the company, those people that remain, a percentage of those start leaving the company anyway afterwards, and often they're high performer employees for reasons that dissuades them from liking the culture and also feeling that they're next on the list. If you do a large layoff, you can count on an increased amount of voluntary turnover to follow on for the next couple of months. Another thing it is shown to do, companies that do large layoffs, it decreases their customer loyalty in two aspects. One, companies and consumers like to buy from organizations that treat their employees well. And big layoffs are often very much covered in the press. And it's also, you're unleashing, X thousand employees onto the marketplace who are not going to talk up your services. So it does tend to have a decreased amount of customer loyalty, not only from positions, for example, if you're cutting customer support, of course, that's going to hurt, but even just the general reputation of your company tends to take a hit. There's also kind of some other residual effects. It has been studied that companies that go through layoffs actually end up with lower productivity of their remaining employees because of kind of the mental distress aspect of being an organization, having to look over your shoulder and wondering when the next wave is going to come. Employees that remain after a layoff tend to be less productive, mainly due to this distress factor. And then kind of tying into all three is the damage it does to your company brand from all of these aspects. You want to be known as the #1 company, the company that cares, the company that believes in its people to produce the best products. That's all going to suffer if you do a layoff. So things to consider. Now, moving on to essential employees, I'm actually going to address this from two aspects. First of all, because essential employees are, from the government standpoint, being very highlighted during this recent pandemic crisis we're going through, the COVID-19. But if you go back a few years, the government passed what was called the Essential Services Act. And what that did was actually identified individuals that the government deemed as performing essential services to the country and the community. And they pretty much revolved around, it was defined as those that do work involving the safety of human life and the protection of property. And this kind of very singularly focused on industries such as healthcare, hospitals and such, law enforcement, of course, our police and federal agencies, and any types of emergency personnel, such as firemen or EMT operators, were all identified as essential services by this act and as jobs that need to be protected. During this recent breakout in the COVID-19, these definitions have actually been expanded both at the local level and added to federal roles as essential services. One that might seem surprising, but not so much if you're a small to medium-sized business, is the banking industry. A lot of jobs inside the banking industry have been determined to be essential services, because they are the vehicles that the government is using to push out all of these stimulus and small business loans and such out to businesses and people in the community. So the government has deemed that these are essential, particularly the people who are processing the transactions, handling the loans and the financing, and people in the call centers who are actually getting all the calls as how do I do this? When do I get my loan? All of that type of stuff. The other two might be a little more obvious. The food and agriculture industry, people are stocked up and waiting at home, but they are living and working at home, but they still have to eat and exist. So grocery workers, delivery workers, agriculture workers have all been added to lists, as well as many in the energy industry, even though the energy industry is taking a bit of a hit right now because nobody's driving or flying. But when you think of all the aspects of the industry and energy industries, just from basic utilities, keeping people's lights on, and their houses warm or whatever have been deemed, very essential, as well as logistics as far as being able to get the right energy to the right places, and even things as simple as gas stations. As most of our stuff is coming to us being shipped, that can't stop just because people are working from home. So people providing service and gas have actually also been deemed as essential industries. So quite a bit of expansion as to jobs that are deemed essential by the government, and that'll come in to play as I point out some of the advantages of having more essential workers at your organization. Now, in addition to what the government deems as an essential worker, companies in times like this have to come up with their own definitions of who's essential to the company. I put together a selection of kind of analysis questions that, again, I've gleaned out from multiple sources as to how you can evaluate the essential employees within your organization. The first one is to talk about how closely tied to the revenue of the company is the particular position. Of course, you don't like to be that transparent, but the company can't go if money isn't coming in. But that doesn't mean that you get rid of everybody but your salespeople. There's a lot of people in the food chain or the ecosphere as to being tied to revenue. If a product is selling, you don't want to get rid of people who design and manufacture them. Also those who market it and put it out to the marketplace. But then afterwards, if it's a company that requires support and internal call centers where people are needing to know how to operate something, or being able to return bad products or non-functional items for functional items, all of these are can be tied directly to revenue that's coming into the organization. Now, also a good question when you're trying to deem, what an essential employee is also how many employees are doing what could be an essential job. So the job could be considered essential in that it ties to one of those things above. But if you have 50 of them and you only need 30, it could be that 20 might be deemed as non-essential, and that goes into the internal forecasting or whatever within the organization. Also, the level of expertise or skill required to do a job. A lot of jobs can be deemed as maybe easily plugged because the skill set may not be as evolved, and you can lose someone and get them replaced quickly. But if a job requires an expertise that's been accumulated by schooling or certifications or on-the-job training that you can put a reasonable amount of time to actually get that type of person, you don't want to lose these people and then have to spend 9 months or a year recruiting someone like that back after things have gone south. And even during down times, these are generally the people who can do more than one thing. So you would like to make sure that that's an essential position. Also, it's important to evaluate. You could have an essential job, but it might not be a full-time job for anybody. So you might want to decide how much time is spent doing that job, and it's a essentiality. One I put down here is payroll. A lot of what's more essential than making sure that everybody gets paid. But in a lot of organizations, generally, since people mostly only get paid twice a month, payroll is often not a full-time job for a person. Someone is most often doing something else in addition to making sure that payroll goes through. So depending on if that's a full-time job or whatever in your company, you might want to just deem what percent of that is essential. What I like to do, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a CEO of a medium-sized company, but really what you need to do as a leader is, picture the operations without that job and what would happen. Now you could also have an HR person who has to put themselves in the place of that particular business leader, and how would losing that person impact that particular leader? And I always look at it from the standpoint, if I lose a manager, will I or someone else have to do his job? Will that dilute their efforts? And same down the level, if a manager loses a staff person, are they going to have to take over that job? And what does it do to the main focus of that person? So a lot of questions you want to ask if you're trying to determine whether something is an essential job. But these are a good list of questions to kind of just start from. Now, when determining positions as being at risk, it's more as opposed to questioning, more of scenario planning. So essentially, there are two types of risks to a business: internal risks and external risks. The internal ones are the ones you're probably most aware of. The people, the personnel. How could they're malfunctioning or being sick or being toxic or whatever affect the business, as well as technology inside the company. If a server goes down, how does that affect you? Have you fallen behind on technology and producing better products? And then also kind of the physical well-being of your employees while they're doing the job. But more when you're judging at-risk employees is what happens from external factors that'll affect the business, and what will that do to your workforce? So kind of the three buckets that fall in there. First is economic. You can have the big picture where we just fall into a recession or a depression. Your revenues go down and certain jobs become less necessary or not necessary at all. There's nature, natural acts. If any of you do contracts, the term force majeure talks about, when something happens, such as a typhoon or something hits Southeast Asia, and that might be a key part of your distribution network, or a pandemic or something like that we're going through right now, and that causes people to not necessarily be able to go out and buy things they might normally do during better times. And then there's also political consideration. So you might be a defense contractor, and the government might decide to not fund a particular type of ship or type of something like that. Or in pharmaceuticals, it might be something where the government deems that a drug has not passed a test or something. And all of those things are outside necessarily of the company's control, but when they hit, the company has to act on them. And you might argue that right now we are experiencing all three. Going back to the sports analogy, that would be considered a hat trick. We are experiencing an economic recession, possibly being brought on by a natural cause, the pandemic, and the government's having to do things to stave off what could come sooner. So, all right, you've got your list, you've got your at-risk jobs, and you have your essential jobs. So then you go through the analysis of, can I move some of these people in at-risk jobs into essential jobs? Now, there's some scenarios where that might be easier than others. So we'll talk maybe about, for example, a large bank. So with everybody being locked down and not going out, you might be in an instance where people out at your branches who do more of the retail banking are not very busy because nobody's coming inside the building. They might be going through the drive-throughs, but that might not necessarily take up all of the bandwidth of the people employed there. So you go down and look at a position like a teller. Does a lot of face-to-face meetings, knows, has to deal with client problems, has to know the company processes, and has to be able to access all the internal systems to be able to do their job. Now, you look at that from a standpoint, we go over and talk about, one of the jobs that's been deemed essential both by the government and internally at banks, such as something as a call center employee. Very similar skill set. Of course, I don't work in banking, so I might have missed a few things. But someone working in a call center would definitely have to be dealing with client problems, knowing the company processes and accessing internal systems. Of course, there might be more skills down there that are not as instantly transferable. But if you can do that kind of analysis and look at two jobs side to side, maybe you can move some of those tellers over into the call centers, particularly now as call centers are being inundated and you're likely going to need more than you have right now, is a good example of how you might do workforce reallocation within your organization just to meet an immediate demand. Now, if you go maybe to a a longer stretch in this. It might not be just a lateral transfer where there doesn't have to be that much training, but if you look at the jobs that your company was really needing to hire before all this set in, and this is a list, Money Inc. every year does a list of the top 20 jobs for the coming year. And in 2020, I pulled out all the ones that are corporate jobs. There are other ones in there like dental assistant and physical therapist, but these are the ones that are pretty much ones that are at corporations. So if you don't have that, in your company, the ability to necessarily just move people because it's such a close fit, you might also, this might be a great time to maybe invest in some people within the company and see if you can't train them to be one of these jobs or another type of job that's more important to your company. Now, it won't have the immediate impact if someone's just like a close fit and you can shift them right over, but you're going to need these jobs when things return to normal, and you're going to have to go out and recruit for them. And recruiting is a long process. Why not right now invest in some of the people who maybe you could move over to them, see if you can turn them into these high demand employees that'll save you a step down the road. Now, the advantages of workforce reallocation in this manner are great. First of all, speaking with the what the government deems as an essential job, those are the type of things that'll put you to the top of the list for government assistance in your industry. The number of essential employees as deemed by the government will get you higher up on those bailouts and loans that come through. So being able to move people over could have an immediate positive impact for your company outside of just having people to fill those jobs. But in the longer picture, the broader picture of the company, if you can do this and avoid doing the larger layoffs, you'll have all the you'll negate all those impacts that I talked to on the first slide. You'll lower high performer turnover, and it's a good time to buy loyalty during tough times, as well as customer loyalty. They'll see you're the kind of company that believes in your employees. You'll increase productivity, removing that distress factor, and all of that again goes into that company brand. Of course, any large or small company, you want to get on those lists of the great places to work for, the Forbes and the Fortune and Tech Titans, and there's a lot of lists that people follow as to what are the great companies to work for, and you want to be known as one of those. And how you act during these times is gonna deem that. It's gonna affect your company brand, and if you do it the right way, you get onto these lists. But the important thing is you want to be ready with your best workforce when this crisis is over. So when we get out of this, you don't want to have to ramp up hiring. You don't want to have to be able to search around and then find out, where did I lose people, and now that I got to fill those gaps. You want to be ready to hit the ground running when the market presents that opportunity. So one example I use, which isn't quite a parallel to what we're talking about today, but just talking about the economy and the effects on society, and how you could be one of those companies or organizations that goes down in history for having done something that transformed to the betterment of the greater society. So in 1914, Henry Ford, he paid his factory workers $5 per day, which back in that time was actually twice the going rate for manufacturing jobs. People wondered why he did it. He said he did it because he wanted his employees to be able to afford the cars that he produced. And this had a really boomerang effect in that by doing this, he forced not only his direct car competitors, but pretty much most of the manufacturing sector to raise their wages to almost match the $5 per day. So not only did it produce something where his employees could then afford his cars, it basically raised up the whole middle class in manufacturing, so where they could afford cars, and his business boomed, and lots of other car companies popped up. And in some respects, this action is actually credited with what actually gave birth to the middle class. you suddenly didn't have just haves and have-nots. You had a whole group in between of not haves as much, but still has plenty being born. And during this time is a great time to experiment how your company could be that next great company that does something that seems not as practical on the surface, but makes you one of those legendary companies. I'm not going to do a demonstration today, but I would like to just point out that if you want to take some interest in our tool, the Trend Data tool, which has a great module for workforce reallocation, identifying essential and at-risk positions. Our predictive models can tell you what your future is going to look like and how much you're going to have to keep recruiting for essential positions, and then also give you all that nice comparative information as to how many at-risk positions do you have, what's a transferable job, what are the compensation differences between the positions, and also things like can that job be done remotely. But if you want to look at our solution, we're happy to schedule another meeting and work on you in that. But right now, I would like to get back and just take any questions. And while we're asking questions, I'll leave this slide up. If you want to see the recording of this webinar or any of our webinars, you can go to our website. And if you go to the resources tab on our website, it has all of our recorded webinars on there, as well as blogs, case studies, anything else you might want to look to provide more reading while you're working at home. But Jonathan, do we have any questions?
Yes, a couple of questions. The first one is, will the recording of this webinar be available? Mm-hmm. And you just answered that.
Okay.
Yes, it will. Not only will it be on this page on our website, but I'll also make a point to just send it to everyone via email. I'll send you a link to where the webinar will be hosted on our website. We do have a question. Someone asked privately, do you have a recommendation for help executing a reallocation program?
Yes, actually, Trend Data has consultants that can do that. So we'd be happy to speak with you after and kind of team up and get you together with our consultants that could actually help you do that. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, we're at the top of the hour, but if anyone else has a question, you can either just send a quick chat, or I'm sure Tom will provide some contact information.
Yeah. And before you go, I just want to let you know we're going to try and do these every week. So we're going to do one on rehires in the coming recovery next week, talk about alumni networks, boomerang hires, improved workforce planning. And it's actually at the same time next Thursday, and you can actually use the same credentials you used to log on today to log on to that meeting. So we'd love to see you come back, and we'll try and do these every Thursday, and keeping them topical, addressing what's going on at the time, and look forward to seeing you all. If you want to reach out to us, I put down my personal information, my email at Trend Data, my Twitter, and my blog site. But also we have the Trend Data information. If you would like to see some more or talk some more, just email marketing@Trend Data, and that's our company Twitter handle, Trend Data Inc., and our website, trenddata.com. So with that, I would like to thank everybody for attending. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and hopefully we'll be doing these from our office sometime in the near future. But please stay safe at home, adhere to all of the health experts' guidelines to stay healthy, and we look forward to seeing and talking to you again. Thank you very much.